Okay, everyone. If you can't see my screen by now, but you can hear my voice, certainly chat in and tell us that, and make sure we get this working for everyone. You should be seeing my screen. You should be seeing a PDF file showing the top of the slide deck, I guess. Just going to have a few slides here, and we'll start in one moment. All right. So the way this is going to work is I'll be enlarging here the presentation, and then my name is Mike Suding. I'm a sales engineer for 2 years here at LogicMonitor, and I've done a lot of work in IT, starting way back in 1987, and I had my own business installing computers and networks in schools. And then I had a few IT director jobs. The biggest one probably was the IT director job at Citrix Online here in Santa Barbara, where I'm from. I had that for 7 years, and then I'm now here at LogicMonitor for 2 years. So welcome everyone. This is GoToWebinar. This should look familiar. This should be on the right side of your screen. You know, it looks different on a Mac than a PC slightly. And this is where we want you to ask the questions. So just type in the questions here. Sorry we can't open it to audio. If we have problems, maybe we will, but we're going to do it this way. And then it'll make sure we get first come, first serve type of questions. And we can move along. So here's the agenda. I'm going to talk about the architecture of LogicMonitor and how it works. I'm going to find and fix problems. I'm going to show you, proactive, automatic fixing, and reactive in my 3 examples. Then I'm going to talk about the alerts and deliveries, and specifically a ticketing system. I have Zendesk up and working, and show you an example of that. Then I'm going to go through a general demo. And this is probably where the most questions are going to go. I'd ask at least during the beginning part that we won't be able to handle the questions, but definitely during the general demo. And then we're saving 15-20 minutes if things go well for time for questions at the end for sure. So. This is the architecture diagram for LogicMonitor. And let's start here kind of on the left side. Here we have this pin in the circle here. That's to indicate our collector. A collector is a 2 Windows services or a Linux daemon installed on one of your computers per network. And what that does is that reaches out to all of these different things, meaning apps or containers, databases, servers, you name it, and then it's sent out encrypted over one port, no need to open any ports in the firewall, up to our data center. We have 3 data centers around the world, and you log in and see this type of interface, which you'll see in detail in the demo. In that web interface, we have alerting and controlling that. We have, graphs and data showing correlations, dashboards, of course, which you see on this screen, forecasting, when will I run out of space on that hard drive, etc., and then, of course, reporting. Over here on the right, we have, kind of the outputs of LogicMonitor, if you will, in that we can integrate with messaging systems like Slack or PagerDuty, which is just a notification system. You don't need to use those, of course. And then we have several ticketing systems. ConnectWise and Autotask are mostly for managed service providers. And then down here we have Puppet. In that Puppet category, we also work with Chef and Ansible and Salt and other automation platforms. Mainly that's done through our API. So that's overall how it works, which I think is helpful. Here's some more detail, and this is purposely busy here just to show you a lot of the variety. By the way, we'll have these slides available for you if you want to refer back to them later. And this shows, when we're talking to Active Directory, what protocol or what methods do we use? It's WMI. When we talk and get Windows logs, how are we doing that, with WMI and so on? You can see some of these are SNMP, which, is probably the oldest and simplest of the protocols, but also widely used and still quite powerful. Then when we get down to some of these more complex devices, the vendors choose different protocols like SMIS for EMC storage. these green, excuse me, one of these is a miscolored here, but these green ones here indicate normally where the information flows into our collector, from the device into our collector, and that is syslog. So even though we're not a log aggregator, we can certainly ingest logs and alert on them, based on some attributes like, severity or words in the message, etc. Similarly with SNMP traps, some devices only send out SNMP traps. Here's a special one. If you want to find out who's hogging the bandwidth on your network, NetFlow's the go-to method for that, and the cousins of that are JFlow and SFlow. JFlow is specific to Juniper, and SFlow is more generic across a lot of vendors, especially HP, etc. And that, again, happens inbound. And then this goes around the bend here all these different ways. So it's purposely busy. After it gets in the collector, it's immediately sent up to our data center, and that's encrypted using TLS 1.2. And it's an outbound port, so there's no openings in the firewall necessary. Here's our data center. This also has a cloud collector, and that's the way we talk to CloudWatch API when we're talking about Amazon Web Services and Azure. We use their Azure API, and this is our newest addition to the cloud family. Here is Azure. So that's a little bit more detail there, but I drew this because lots of people ask me, how do you monitor this or that? And this is the protocols. All in all, there's about 20 protocols, 20 methods of collecting information. So, people, probably the most common questions are, do you monitor this? Do you monitor that? And the answer is usually yes. And the reasons it is because we have those 20 protocols, and if it's exposed, if the data is exposed, the metrics are exposed, we can grab it using one of those 20 methods. And so I won't read off all of these, but these are the firewalls, routers, switches, etc. This is all the hardware on the left, and then kind of my brain dump on all the applications, infrastructure type applications mostly, but some very custom ones as well. And I put more at the bottom as the catch-all on purpose. So that's what we mean by the whole IT stack, including cloud. And I would say LogicMonitor is definitely a tip of the iceberg type of product. You could say that about a lot of things, but I generally believe that to be true, in that what I'm able to show you in a whole hour is just this much, but there's a lot more under the surface, and more importantly, a lot more that you can do with it, because you can write your own data sources, you can run scripts, and you can do a lot of custom stuff, and that's what I mean by tip of the iceberg. So I'm going to show you later, some alerts and handle them, but people often ask me, what does an alert email look like? They can look like a lot of different things, but this is sort of the generic out-of-the-box one. And, in the subject, you have the most important information, which is, what system and what severity level and what's going wrong. So in this case, the server, the display name we gave to the server is a 2012 Windows Server, Oracle, and the volume drive D is full. And so that's what I'm going to reply to here or handle in a few minutes. So and later, if we have time, we'll have a joke contest. So I thought I would kick it off here. There's a $10 gift card for the best joke, just one, and it should be IT related, but then someone reminded me that it's the 4th of May, and that's Star Wars Day. Even though I'm not a huge fan, I still enjoy it. So here, you can groan, and I won't hear you, but I know you're groaning. And here, what do you call a singing computer? Adele. Actually, like your music and have a couple on my iPhone. And this is probably my favorite. It says, I was going to tell you a UDP joke, but you might not get it. For those of you that still didn't get it, UDP doesn't have any confirmation on packets like TCP. So that's a true nerd joke. And for the Star Wars fans in the audience, what's the internal temperature of a tauntaun? And I purposely put this picture here because tauntaun kind of looks like a cross between a bighorn sheep and a camel and a kangaroo. And that's Luke riding the back, and he has to keep himself warm, and he cuts open the tauntaun and sleeps in it. So lukewarm is the answer there. And one of my coworkers heard this joke and said, I have a sleeping bag, a tauntaun sleeping bag. So I thought that was hilarious. All right, so I'm going to skip over that. Let me go to the demo now. And move this aside here. Yeah. Okay, so I'm going to actually log out and show you what it looks like, when you log in. So I'm here at salesdemo.logicmonitor.com, and I see, the logo, generic logo here, but I log in. I've got my credentials there just purposely to save time, and it would be your company name.logicmonitor.com. So I click login here. This is available from anywhere. You don't need a VPN and that sort of thing. So you normally get dropped off at a dashboard. You can set your own default dashboard, and this is just that. So what I did is kicking it up a notch, I guess, on monitoring. You want to monitor more than all the little details. You want to monitor the overview. So what I did is I made a dashboard here showing a web app. Now, this is my web app. It's nothing more than searching a database for products and then ordering them. But it's an important one. It's how I earn money, so to speak. So I did that as an example. So let's take that example. And what does that app depend on? Well, that app depends on firewalls and routers and a web server, which I'll cover. This is yellow, means it has problems. It also has a SQL server and a storage system. So those are all green, but this is yellow. Here's overall checking my status, and 1 is good and anything other than that is bad. And here's showing the overall response time. You can see it's reasonably responsive at 100 milliseconds. So this is a good app dashboard, so to speak. Now I'm going to drill in and solve a problem. So I'm going to click on web servers, and you can see it's a color yellow, so that means it's a warning. It's not a orange and it's not a red. Those are more severe, error and critical is what we call them. So I can see here on the alerts tab that it's drive D filled up. Okay, so there's a feature in LogicMonitor called remote session, which is kind of slick, and what it allows you to do is make a connection. Let's try this here, admin Mike. So I'm logging into this Windows server to fix the problem. And it does this by connecting to the data center, then connecting to the collector, and then connecting to the machine you're monitoring. And so here I am, and of course I have this all staged, but here's my hard drive, and it's drive D, and I can see it's a bunch of log files. And yes, I purposely made these. So let me delete those, and then the message will go away. One thing I forgot to do, I guess because I forgot, is to acknowledge this alert. So let's do that right now. If I click on this, and then I click acknowledge, and then type I will fix this, and then click save, I can share that with my coworkers. Essentially, they'll know that I'm going to fix this, and they don't need to worry about it. So that's workflow features built into LogicMonitor, and that definitely helps. Most people have teams of 2, 3, 5, whatever, 10 people. So let's jump over to the alerts tab, and you can see that the alerts tab. You can see that there's the alert. Still hasn't quite gone away. We need to wait for another polling cycle, but you can see my notes in there. So I logged in as IT, and there's my notes. So coworkers know, and you can see there's a blue and a checkbox there. So that's how you can fix an alert by using LogicMonitor. There you see my thing. My application group is blue now, at least on that particular one. So. All right, so that's example number 1 of upping the game. So let's move on to example number 2. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go back to, I forget which tab here. Let me just close this to minimize. What I'm going to do is I'm going to show you how we monitor a service, a Windows service. I chose a generic one like Windows Print Spooler. Let me show that to you over here. Let's see, let's go to devices, and I just want you to see how it was set up. It happens to be on the Oracle server. And here's all the things we monitor. We'll go over that later, but under here, under Services Restart, I specified keep an eye on Spooler for whatever reason. I care about that. And what's fancy and nice about this is it's going to automatically restart it. So let's put that to the test here. The result code when everything's working is normally 1. So what's going to happen here is I'm going to go over to this and stop this service, and then if I did my work right, it will automatically start in a couple minutes. So let's keep an eye on that, but it should happen in a minute or two. All right, so the third example I was going to show you, save sort of the fanciest one for last, and that is I'm going to cause a problem with the database, see how it shows up in here, see how it affects the overall status of the whole app, which is this website here, that searchable website, and then more importantly, help find the root cause, and I'll explain how that works. But what I did was essentially have a script that runs and tests the speed of the database every minute, and if it's slower than 99 milliseconds, then it will run a detailed stored procedure to dig in and show me my top 10 queries. So let's simulate that and kick that off. I already have a window open here to save time. This is my back-end web and database server, and now I'm purposely going to run this command that's going to heavily load the database. So a sysadmin or a DBA actually might do this by accident or not knowing which is which, but you want to find out about it. So let's run this. So again, heavy load on the database should happen, and it'll take a minute. While we're waiting for that to percolate and pop up on the dashboard, let's take a look at that previous example, which is the result code from there. So you see I've got that spooler there, and the result code changed from 1 to 2. And if I look over on my alert tuning, I can see that 2 means that the first restart worked. So proof is in the pudding, so let's take a look at this. And Microsoft, you have to refresh it, but sure enough, the service is running. So nothing up my sleeve. I was able to automatically restart a service when it detected it was down. So that's example number 2, I guess, of showing that. Let's take a look and see if that's percolated here. Not yet. It will soon. You can already see it starting to spike up on the right here. The response time is taking longer because I've heavily loaded that. Now, while I'm waiting for that, let me show you some of the other outputs there. I mentioned earlier that we integrate with ticketing systems, and last weekend I set up Zendesk here, and we can make API calls to Zendesk to create tickets when there's an alert. And when you acknowledge an alert, you saw I acknowledged one earlier, it will update the ticket, and most importantly, when the alert clears, it'll send a signal over, an API call rather, over to Zendesk to close that. So you can see it's automatically creating the ticket here, and then it would change status and then eventually be closed once the thing is clear. So let's go back. I'm even going to refresh this because I'm even... All right. Should be showing there. We'll have to check back on that later. So let's do that. And now I'm going to move on to the demo portion here. So go back to dashboards. And I'll show you the dashboard functionality. So I'm going to start here on the left and just go down the menus. The main navigation menus are on the left here. And I'll go from dashboard, devices, services, etc. So let's take a look at this. The dashboards here, you can have groups of dashboards and individual dashboards. These are can be created from scratch, or they can be copied over from the device tree. But to show you an example of dashboards, I like to show this one here, which is just an example of each widget. And the widgets can be resized by just dragging the corner here, and I can drag this down here. I think I have a first question here from Aubrey, and actually I have, I think, a bunch of other questions from Aubrey that were emailed to us. And the question is, does LogicMonitor interface with Trackit and BMC as well? So the answer to that is it depends, but probably yes, as long as Trackit has some sort of API that can be created a ticket with an API. Worst comes to worst, you can always have a ticket created by an alert email. So almost any system will accept an email and create a ticket. BMC, I believe Remedy, can work the same way. But the better sort of tighter integrations are done with API, so it really depends on those API. Joe asks a question, is there a topology view? And the answer to that is no, not yet. We are working on that, and I expect it to happen this year. Don't hold me to that, but I expect it to be here this year. The first rendition will probably be drag and drop the devices on a sheet, so to speak, and draw the links between them to establish the relationships. The benefits of that are that you will be establishing dependencies. So let's say if a switch dies, you will get alerts on all the servers that are attached to that switch, because the servers depend on the switch. So hopefully that answers Joe's question. Thanks for that question. So let's move on. I'm just looking over at a second monitor here. If I notice Jake has, copied a question on there. So over here on the left, we have an iPhone app. I don't think I mentioned that yet, but we have an iPhone and Android app, and it's mostly for handling alerts, but you can also look at dashboards, and that's what it looks like, and they're color-coded, so yellow, orange, or red type of thing. Looks almost identical on the Android. Here's a pie shape widget, and the pie shape widget is just for seeing proportions, relative to each other. All right, interrupt this for a question. William asked, does LogicMonitor support sending out alerts via text SMS? Yes, absolutely. Thank you for reminding me of that. I have a demo here of a phone call alert, but the SMS alerts are just similar to the email, but they're shorter, of course. And the beauty of it is you can reply back with an answer like SDT or ACK. You don't have to go into the web interface to do it. But what I thought I would share with you is got to find it on my iPhone. This is decidedly low tech here, but what I'm going to do, I have it on my blog. I have a blog here, blog.mikesuding.com, and then you can play it there for later. But I'm going to play it over the webinar right now. Sorry if you can't hear it. I'll try to make it loud. Here's my interaction with a voice alert.
Alert from LogicMonitor. When 2012 D secondary domain controller is in gold as ping test average is 0.0, press 1. To acknowledge, press 2. To escalate immediately, press 3. To schedule downtime for this alert, press 4. To schedule downtime for this host, press any other key to repeat the message.
I'm going to press 3 for downtime for this alert only.
You are trying to schedule down this alert. Please enter the number of hours to schedule down. Finished by the pound key, press star key to return back.
I'm going to press 5 hours, so 5 pound.
This alert will be scheduled down for 5 hours. Thank you.
Okay, so hopefully that answered that question. Sorry to go through that. I just think it's kind of neat. We call it the robot voice, but basically on the back end we're using Twilio to do that text-to-speech conversion, like the delivery of our SMS alerts, etc. So there's another question from Aubrey, a man after my own heart here, asking lots of questions. Are you able to perform RDP from the mobile app as well? I haven't tried it yet. I suppose you would on a tablet, seeing a whole desktop, but there should be no reason why, because it's basically RDP within a browser. It's actually using a technology called Guacamole, believe it or not, but we've incorporated that into our app. And James asked, will the slide deck be available? Interested in the restarting of service? Yeah, that will be available, and it's also on my blog right now. Let me hop off that, but yeah, it's down there. You have to scroll a bit, but that data source is on there, so it's pretty easy to implement. All right, let me close some of these windows here, some of these tabs, and go back to my widget. And if we have questions, I'll interrupt, but there's a big number widget here. And then the knock widget you kind of saw earlier there, but this is color code. And these tiles here, if you will, can represent a whole data center, a whole branch office, or, just one drive D. So they're very flexible and can be configured there. By the way, if you want to expand some of these, usually you do it with a graph. Let's do this one. You can expand that, and then you can zoom in on these individual graphs. You can hover over it. You can click the data button here, and it will tell you, in the tabular format below, all sorts of things. You can also adjust the date range here. You can download it as a PNG, et cetera, et cetera. So there's a lot of flexibility, and I call them smart graphs. All right. This is an HTML widget. This could be a whole nother monitoring tool or a specialty tool for a specific piece of equipment you have. The SLA widget takes into account hours of operation if you want to set some hours of operation. Also takes into account scheduled downtime. We have this notion of SDT, which is scheduled downtime. So if you're rebooting a Windows server, let's say for the monthly service updates, you can do that and people won't get alerted. There's a Google Map widget. I just have some sample pins here, Atlanta, Boston, and Chicago. This is tied into the device tree so that you know where your equipment is, and it shows green if it's good, and this is showing blue, I believe, because we acknowledge something there. And the overall status or graph widgets here are great for showing top 10s. So you can specify something, you can look across entire dozens or hundreds of servers and find out who are the top CPU users overall. So got another question from William. Call alerts. If the call isn't acknowledged, is there a way for escalating? Oh, good. Yes, there is an escalation chain, and that's under settings escalation chain. So you basically define that, and there's a stage 1 and a stage 2 and stage 3. So here's a good example. Here's one for the knock escalation. So first we'd go here. If in 30 minutes in this settable time, nobody acknowledges, it'll go to the stage 2. If nobody acknowledges at stage 2, it'll go to stage 3. So yes, definitely. All right. So that kind of covers the dashboard and the various widgets. We have a table widget down here, but all right, so let's move on to the Devices tab. Devices tab is where you see all the details, and it's where you add the devices. You click Add and Device Wizard. By the way, there's 4 ways to add devices to LogicMonitor. You can add them through this wizard. You can add them through a net scan, where that just does a ping scan across a certain range that you specify, and then it will add it in according to its reverse DNS name or some other method. And the third way is through a CSV file. If you have a good inventory and you want to import that file, you can do that. And the fourth way is probably the API, and that's kind of like the whole Ansible, Salt, Chef, Puppet method, where essentially those make API calls and you get added to LogicMonitor. There's several ways to get that in there. When you're putting in AWS and Azure, those are nice in the sense that you just put in your credentials here, and it goes and grabs it from the inventory, and and then you specify which services you're going to monitor of all these services in AWS, for example, and that takes care of adding it in. I believe we have a question from Joe. Can you have regional office, etc., dashboards? Absolutely. Yeah, so the dashboards can be drilled down, as well as there's, hopefully I'm answering this correctly, there's a menu that flies out here, and you can create groups here by adding dashboard groups, and these can be dozens of layers thick, or deep I should say. And then you can share a dashboard, let's say with a person, or you can share an individual widget. And actually I'll show that right now. I believe I have a incognito window. Let's say I want to make a dashboard for an executive. So they would go to that same URL, but they would type in their username and password, or you can embed it in the link, and they would log in. And I did this in incognito only because it would recognize me if I did it on the other browser. And you can see here, this looks a lot different than my normal admin view where I have all the menus. Here I only have essentially one group and a few dashboards. So that's the way you let other people look at specific parts of LogicMonitor. So good questions. Thanks guys for asking the questions. All right, finally, I say finally because now I'm looking here, but it found the problem in the database. Let's take a look here. So overall, I was doing a web check here of the whole website with that search taken into account, and that is showing here as an error, and then the SQL Server. So let's dig into the SQL Server here. Let's click on that link, and it'll take me to that server, and I look for the alerts down here at the bottom, and then I see this SQL events, and as promised, it found the hoggiest alert, hoggiest query, and that is me, admin Mike, ran this query, and that bogged down my database. And as a result, my whole website is slow. And I saw that on one dashboard. So that's my third example. I'm glad that worked out. It's sort of hard to do all this in a certain time period, but I'm glad that worked out. All right, so let me continue on with the demo. Sorry, it's a little broken up here, but I think it's interactive and good, so I think it's worth it. Let's go back to the device tree. And got another question. Craig asked, does that executive view come at a certain tier of the service? There's in all tiers. No, it's in all tiers. I would say that in general, at LogicMonitor, we focus on simple pricing in general. So, you win some, you lose some. You pay the same for a big vCenter server with, 100 VMs as you do for a printer. But it all equals out in the end. That's kind of our philosophy on that, simple pricing. A lot of monitoring systems charge you for, probes and, a stackable switch might be by the ports even, but we believe in if it's one thing. Another example of that is wireless access points. We don't charge for the access points, assuming it's connected to a centralized controller. We only charge for that controller. In fact, one of our customers has 9,000 access points and on one Meraki controller. All right, so let's take a look at more of the devices. Let me show you the top level here. I'm logged in and I have IT, branched out here, and I have it broken out by location: Atlanta, Boston, Chicago. I also have a colo data center, and that's where that web SQL server is, by the way. But I also have this area, a different way of looking at it. I'm looking at network gear here, and I'm looking at servers down here, and so on. So a device can be in more than one group, and some of these groups are dynamic groups. You see with the double-headed arrows there. That means the membership or who's in that group is basically dependent on a query. So you could say all these in this subnet or all Cisco switches are in this group, and that happens automatically. So let's start from the top here and take a look at let me collapse this IT branch and just look at it by device type. So let's look at the router here. Okay, I think we got another question. This one from William. Is parent-child supported? For example, we wanted to expose end customer services on our end directly, give them read-only. Yeah, that's exactly right. So what I showed, hopefully I didn't close it, what I showed was this other dashboard, and that's all done with role-based access controls. And that's under settings, by the way. I can open that and show that to you. But this settings down here under users and roles, and I created a role I think called exec. Yeah, I did. There it is. And exec just has view permissions to that one dashboard group and view permissions in the devices, etc. But nothing in settings and nothing in reports and nothing in tech support. And then over here for the user, I have an executive user, and basically it's assigned to that role. So hopefully that answers the question. All right, I see another question coming in from Robert, but here it is. Also, when you mentioned pricing, you mentioned 100 VMs will only count as one service. Is that true? Yeah, that is true. So let me explain. If you're let's say it's vCenter. vCenter can actually monitor, dozens of hosts, and each host can have several VMs. We only charge for that vCenter. Now, with I'll show that to you. Let's just go down and demo that. Let me go to the virtualization part. So, we have in here a vCenter. There you go. So let me expand that. And there's this focus tab when your tree gets expanded kind of big. You just zoom in essentially on that. It sort of locks the tree into that. So here we have a bunch of VMs, and this would show up here. When you look at an individual VM under VMware and go to the graphs table, you see we have the basic four, what I call the basic four: CPU, memory, disk, and network. You're not going to see the SQL underneath that. If you want to see SQL or Active Directory or IS, or if it's Linux, Apache or MySQL or whatever, then you would need to add that in and pay for that device too. But from a VMware whatever perspective, you can monitor the basic four on all of your VMs, all for the cost of one device, this one vCenter. Hopefully that answered that question. So I mean, the answer is good there for sure. I think, you know, it's, but at the same token, you know, if you're desperate to monitor a printer, you know, we would charge you that same device charge. All right, let's go back. All right. So I was on network. You know, we do a lot of monitoring of networks. We also do NetFlow. NetFlow is, you know, who's the top talkers. I think I mentioned that earlier, but this happens to come from a Cisco 3745 router showing, you know, who's the top talkers in the last 5 hours, et cetera, and you can change that. The endpoints, excuse me, this is based on source, and this is based on destination, who the top talkers are. There's a little, flip this switch here and see it on a pie chart so you can kind of see proportions, you know, visually a little better. The top 1,000 are in here, and you could type in a different IP address or whatever to find that, and you can adjust this by looking at, you know, one direction or just outbound or all interfaces or a specific interface. So it's quite adaptable. A lot of people charge extra for NetFlow. This comes in our enterprise package, you know, included, no additional charge there. So normally on a router, you know, you look at, you know, the fancier it is, the more branches it's going to have. Like this one has fans in it. This one has, you know, power supplies that can be monitored and so on. You also notice we have S&MP traps flowing in here, temperature, etc. These things are called config sources. I don't think I mentioned them so far here yet, but this is a separate, you know, paid item, but it will do backups of the configs of the network gear. So once an hour, once a day, it makes the backups. More importantly, it allows you to see the differences in this diff view. So differences show up as yellow, additions show up as green, and deletions show up as red. And so you can just side by side go down here and see, you know, what's changed. You can then download that file. It doesn't push out the restore, but it definitely does the hard part, which is making the backup. And that's all integrated into, you know, one tool, you know, into LogicMonitor. So that makes it valuable in that regard. Okay, we have another question from Chris. We have Avaya switches and have difficulty monitoring them in the past. What can LogicMonitor talk natively to Avaya switches? Okay, well that's a good segue. I think it was Aubrey or Jean, I'm not sure, by the email had asked, you know, do you monitor checkpoint? And I've opened up a lot of tabs here, but let me go, let me close some of these here. All right, sure, I'll close that one. Okay, and so if you go under here under settings, data sources are the recipes that we use to monitor stuff. So let's type in Avaya. So we have, you know, a certain amount in our library, and we have a bunch more internal here. So we do have Avaya switches. I don't see it in this library, but yeah, we can definitely monitor Avaya switches. And, you know, this is my job as a sales engineer is to, you know, work with you to make sure all your stuff is monitored. We do a proof of concept. Usually it's 2 weeks, but it can be longer if you're busy on the account. And, you know, we can figure that out for you. But the other gentleman asked about checkpoint, so I'm going to show what a data source looks like briefly here. So a data source, this one happens to grab fan information from a checkpoint, and basically it you know, data sources are applied to certain things. This one says only if it's checkpoint, only if it's SNMP. Check every 3 minutes, use the SNMP collection method, and first it looks for a list of fans. That's what makes it multi-instance. Then it gathers the detail using SNMP on the fan speed and the fan status. So that's an example of a data source. So we have a few thousand of these, and we're making more every week, so to speak. And that's a lot of what's on my blog is like special adjustments or new ones for, and then of course we have a community where customers can share theirs as well. All right. So let's go back to our device tree here, and when I get another question in, and I'll certainly answer that. And so we looked at the Cisco router there. There's the switch. Those are very similar. There's the Meraki cloud controller. We talked to the cloud controller, and there it shows the access points, and you can see these are some of you know, office access points, the interfaces on the access points, and so on. So here we have a Palo Alto firewall. This one actually happens to use an API. So there's lots of granular metrics on this. Even pulling the serial number and a threat analysis, so showing the number of threats through our firewall and how it's gone up or down. Another question from Joe. I say it like maybe there's two Joes, I don't know. Does it get the switch configs via SNMP or SSH telnet? Good question. It gets it via SSH or telnet. And let me see if I can show you that. Yeah, those are called config sources. And I think most of them are just under here under grouped. But basically, let's take a look at this Cisco iOS one here. And there's different ones for different type of equipment and different methods, but basically it's a script, and we take care of writing the script, but it logs into that, runs the show config command, and then captures that output, and then does a comparison, and there's the difference test, and then the retrieval, can you retrieve, and then there's even details on here of ignore certain lines. So it gets quite flexible and quite smart about that. And then it'll even do policies, check against your specified policy. Is it missing this encrypted field? In other words, are you encrypting or showing plain text passwords in your config or something like that? Or verify that this value is here. And if it's not, then what kind of alert would it be, etc. So very powerful aspect of LogicMonitor. It's relatively new within the last 6 months or so. All right, jumping over to the other tab. Good questions, loving the questions. Let's go look at servers, and let's take a look. I'll take a look at Exchange servers. So a lot of people have moved Office 365, but there's still obviously millions of people using Exchange, and we monitor Exchange and expand this, and you can see based on the role that you are, we have over like 130 data points for Exchange, but if you look at mailbox role database and how healthy are those, and the transport queues, how many are in the queue, and then if you take a look at the total queue, you can see all the graphs and see how that, and set your alerts. All the alerts are put in according to the best practices or the specific vendor, but you can certainly adjust that. Those are all under alert tuning. So any of these with the threshold in there, have an alert threshold, and then you can click here to edit it. That's a one-off edit of this particular one. You can go to the global, or you can define it at the group level as well. All right, Robert asked a question, how do you guys handle auto-scaling in the cloud? Do you support GCP and AWS, and how is the pricing handled with that? Good question. So I can answer most of those. Auto-scaling, if you were to look at, let's see, devices, and I assume by auto-scaling you mean EC2 instances spinning up according to rules. That's usually what auto-scaling means. But we do, monitor auto-scaling. Let me show that service here. Auto-scaling, but in general, we add devices automatically. We can run this set to custom. You can automatically remove things from monitoring, by deleting them when they go away. Automatically delete terminated AWS resources. So that will work too. I'm not sure what GCP is. I'll have to get back up. Oh, Google Cloud, I'm sorry. Google Cloud, yeah, we don't have the APIs written to that. That's like in our world, we see that as a distant third in terms of popularity, but I think that's not an if, that's a when. And then the pricing, the way the pricing is handled currently is that, if you get 100 devices of LogicMonitor, that's how we license by device, then you get, I think, 300 cloud resources. And, most of the time EC2 is one resource, all the time it is, but RDS databases, for example, each table is considered a resource, and that's one of the reasons we give the multipliers there. I think with the higher end packages, you get 5 times the number of devices you have. All right, Craig asked a question, the threat analysis for Palo Alto, does it alert on that? Yes, it does. If you can establish that. I don't know if it's built in. We can certainly take a look. And ask follow-up questions if I didn't answer your question, or maybe I'll have to take it offline, but let's see. So let's go back to the Palo Alto, go back one level in the tree, and one more time. And oops, let me just go back here to network and take a look, see what's out of the box. If we look at threat analysis, yeah, so if the threat count critical here, I think what I think happens here is sometimes the user interface of the Palo Alto or whatever might have established thresholds, but certainly you could you're getting the threat count total, and so you could alert based on that. So you can do I think in this case you can do the alerts and set the thresholds rather in Palo Alto and just read them in LogicMonitor, or set them in LogicMonitor and alert on them. And yes, I mean, these are warning and error, but you could certainly have critical. In general, we recommend you don't have the warnings and errors. The yellows and oranges go to your phone. You just have those, the critical ones go to your phone typically, because these are usually early warnings and you have time to fix it. So yeah, I think that answers that question. At what levels does that alert? Severity or perhaps trends of increase? We don't have, we have some trending kind of thing in the sense that you can use the forecast rules to know when you're going to run out of disk space or just about any data point with that regard. So, you know, you can use the forecast capability to know when you're going to run out. We don't have dynamic thresholds yet whereby, you know, if it's twice its normal value, it'll be an alert. I look forward to that as well. All right, so let's see. All right, Jake is reminding me I have 12 minutes left, so I'm going to speed it up a little bit here, sorry. So you saw a Windows server, you saw some of the elements of Exchange. SQL is the same way, there's lots of data points. IIS the same way. Let's take a look at a Linux server. We monitor this with SNMP, but we also auto-detect some things like Apache. If the Apache status page is exposed, we can monitor that. We look on port 3306, which is a typical MySQL port, and find the instances there and show you a lot of, you know, DBA happy graphs there, so you can see, you know, what might be going wrong with your database there. All right, so, you know, mostly it's Linux and Windows out there, but there's other operating systems, you know, FreeBSD, AIX, or some aspects of it. I've even monitored OpenVMS and AIX, so lots of capabilities to monitor. It's more of a factor is, does the device expose the data? Here's a NetApp, which happens to use a API, and you know, you can see aggregates, but most storage servers are similar to this. You have like a volume, both performance and usage, and then the things, the entities above a volume are important as well, and then all the health of the usual power supply, fans, temperature, etc. I think I talked a little bit about virtualization also. Again, you can monitor at vCenter, or if you don't even have a vCenter, you can do the host itself. Hyper-V, of course, and even Citrix Zen Server. So one of the things that isn't on this list is the DRAC. That's a Dell remote assistance card, and we monitor that definitely using SNMP, and we have huge amounts of data for the DRAC, everything down to chassis status, to power supply, to, you know, battery, and you name it. So there's tons of information. Similar thing with HP's ILO. All right, got a question from Robert. URL, yeah, for the blog. It'll be at the end, but yeah, it's blog.mikesuding.com. Yeah, all right. So that's just me, whatever, sharing what I feel like sharing. It's not an official thing, but you know, I'm passionate, so I like to share some of that. All right, let's take a look at services. Don't want to overlook services, because this allows you to do website checking. So you can do a website check. You can check from 6 points around the world from our various checkpoint areas, even Singapore and Sydney. You specify what constitutes an alert, you know, if it takes longer than this many milliseconds, and check every minute, and only alert after it's failed twice. That helps eliminate the false alarms. You can do a authentication, basic or NTLM, or you can even do some scripts to log into internal websites, etc. So don't overlook this. This is a very powerful feature. I used it a lot. You get a standard amount with them with every account, and then there's variations of this where you're checking it from a collector, and that's that little icon shows right there. We also do ping checks. So, for example, when I worked at Citrix, we did ping checks from office to office to check the VPN, but also to check the internet connection. For some of the smaller offices, they had their own separate internet connection, and that would tell me if their internet connection went down or not. So, very helpful there. Even a simple ping can, save your hide sometimes. All right, the alerts tab I went over a little bit earlier, and it shows this is just the clearinghouse for all the alerts, and then it shows you yellow, orange, or red, and whether you've checked some stuff off, and you can make filters for this. So if I want to see things that I've acknowledged, or don't want to see the things I've acknowledged rather, I would choose this filter, and it's kind of like a shopping list. You don't want to see the stuff you've already got in your basket. So that's a helpful workflow thing that I used to use. And then the reports. Reports are similar to dashboards, with the exception that you usually have these emailed to you, but you don't have to. You can run them off the fly here. And we have starting templates for a whole bunch of stuff, everything from the SLA to websites to inventory, etc. So lots of flexibility there. And the bottom line is that when you choose one of these, you get to modify all the time frames, etc. But this is the important difference. You can email it to yourself or whoever, daily, weekly, or monthly, and then at the top, the choices of formatting are HTML, CSV, comma-separated values, and PDF, Adobe PDF. So Craig asks, can you monitor the Supermicro IPMI? Yes, we can. In fact, I'm working on that with a customer now, but we have data sources for that, and yeah, we definitely speak IPMI in our list of protocol suites. So I'd be happy to work with you on that if you want to get into a POC. I haven't mentioned it yet, but that's what I do. That's what we do here is, if it's the right time for you to, look at LogicMonitor and you're close to buying, we can help you prove out all of those concepts that you're trying to improve your monitoring. So let's take a last look at settings, and I've got 6 minutes. That should be no problem. And let's take a look, just top-down kind of thing. There's so many features. Audit logs, this allows you to see who did what and when. So if I type in Mike, I can see Mike was a busy guy, deleting this or changing that. So this kind of keeps all your coworkers honest, so to speak. The account information is where you set your billing contacts and your time zone and your logo here. Usually you would put your company logo up here at the login screen and on the reports. The alert settings, this is where those alert rules, I talked about them earlier, but basically you say, okay, I want all my server alerts that are critical to go to this person, and then if they don't answer, go to this person, and they don't answer, go to this person, that kind of thing. Those are the escalation chains. So use rules and chains in combination with each other to achieve the desired results. There's recipient groups, which is nothing more than a convenience time saver to group a bunch of people together so you can, make changes quicker. The collectors, which is the heart of LogicMonitor, these are self-updating collectors. There's a collector ID number, and they have failover capability. So if one dies, it rolls over to the next. They also have a alert notification. If we don't hear the heartbeat every 3 minutes, we're going to send you an alert. So integrations I talked about with Zendesk, but we have a bunch of built-in integrations for ticketing systems or messaging systems here, and this will grow over time, of course. I talked a little bit about the data sources. You saw a couple of sample ones. Event sources are where it's coming in. And this, you have your choice here: log files, tailing a log file, receiving SNMP traps from devices, syslog, and Windows events. Config sources we talked about, way to back up those configs. Property sources are for setting properties on a device or a group automatically based on something you learned from a script. And I'll jump over some of these. Customize your messaging, the wording in your message and your alerts. That net scan I talked about, finding devices, automatically adding them. Aubrey asks, any collection / reporting available for Commvault? Yes, definitely. Spiceworks, yeah, so yes, we have Commvault data sources, and we can, you know, monitor Commvault systems. And then Chris asks, is Spiceworks one of the supported ticketing systems? I wouldn't say it's supported. I think those are run on premise. It would definitely, you know, take an email. I don't believe that they have an API to create tickets, but I could be wrong on that. So, you know, be happy to work with you to sort of try that out or research that. But and then the trouble with some on-premise stuff is that if you had that, you'd have to put it in the DMZ, so it could be, you know, so a system like ours could talk to it. But basically, we're sending out webhook, you know, API calls to create those tickets. All right, so users and roles. We talked about that earlier where you give permissions to different people. This can tie into a single sign-on system. So we use SAML. Most external authentication systems are SAML based, so you can tie into Active Directory federated services, ping identity, one login, Okta is what we use here at the moment, and several other systems. So we got time for a couple more questions. So shoot, we did have, I'll run through this. James asks, any plans to flesh out the event source to include popular Cisco devices log events? Let's see if I understand that. Any plans to include popular Cisco? Oh, I see. I think I see what you mean. So certain events come in for Cisco, and they have certain wording, but to make those into alerts. No, I haven't heard that request before. I think it's doable. I haven't heard any plans to do it. We do actively listen to feature requests from, you know, customers to add this or that, and you know, our forums are an excellent place to do that. So let me show you that. I always remember help.logicmonitor.com, and this is where a lot of our documentation is, including our API developers guide with all the nitty-gritty details, and here's our forums. So I would say probably if you're a customer or know a customer, you could do that, but there's the feature requests right here, feature requests, and then other people can pile on that and you know, +1 it, etc. So this is an important growing area of our platform. Let's see. Let's go to the last slide here in my presentation. There we go. Got the website, of course, logicmonitor.com. There's my email address, and there's my blog address. And you know, you can sign up online, and then we'll call you and arrange you know, a demo and a proof of concept. But the idea behind this webinar was to hopefully show you how to up your game with those sort of 3 examples there, and hopefully you're ready to and incented to up the game in your monitoring and check out LogicMonitor. That's it, guys. Thanks for joining the webinar. And if this is, oh, please, please, please do the survey if you can. It's not like my job depends on it, but certainly my brownie points do. So give me a good rating if I deserved it, and submit your jokes, and I'll pick the best one and inform the lot of you who won. So has to be should be an IT joke, but hopefully you like my tauntaun joke. Anyways, thanks everyone, and we'll see you next time. Bye-bye.